Right. So now I got the notes from my previous session. So yes, now we are ready to begin. So I'll start this session. So in the last session we covered microservices. What are microservices? We covered about Java EE, Jakarta EE, and how it's different from Spring Boot, where Spring Boot fits in. And this is some important inputs about Spring Boot, what it does, and then we discussed about various Spring libraries. So Spring libraries like Spring Data, Data Access, Spring Batch processing, and various other modules of Spring. So that's one of the main advantage of Spring Boot, that it is having a lot of plugins, and we can integrate and get any functionality. There are a lot of integrations, and there are a lot of advanced features available which we can include in our Spring environment or Spring Boot. And Spring Boot is we discussed the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Spring Boot is helping developers to quickly bootstrap into Spring projects.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, in this entire series, probably I'm not sure how many sessions I'll take, but yes, I am planning to cover various topics, and these topics include. Let me list down all these topics. So we discussed about microservices. We discussed about distributed systems already in the previous sessions, and this is for Java developers. Definitely Spring Boot will be covering all the latest features which are available. So we will be covering Spring Boot 3.1. This is the version, and we'll be using Spring Java 20 mostly. And I will be sharing examples which are based on Maven. We will be covering logging as well. So yes, various topics which are important is about logging. We'll be covering how to build REST APIs using Spring Boot. So let me put this as subheadings. And to demonstrate, yes, we will also cover how to integrate React based application to Spring Boot. And also we will be covering monolith versus microservices, when to choose which one, and if we choose to use microservices, then how to go with event driven architecture. And then we will be covering a lot of other features, advanced features, such as how to make the application fault tolerant, how to scale Spring Boot applications, how to deploy it on cloud, and also we'll be covering various testing strategies, behavioral driven development, how to do test cases, how to test Spring applications, how to do distributed tracing, how to integrate Spring based microservices with API gateways, So this is mostly the list of topics which we will be covering. So yes, let's talk about Spring. So Spring, as we discussed last time, Spring is a modular and flexible framework and provides vast range of features. This is all demonstrated from the list of libraries. And you can use Spring in combination with any technology. For example, React.js for UI. And you can also use various databases. Spring provides integration with databases, relational databases, NoSQL databases. Spring provides good control for transaction management, and Spring has a lot of security features, and it is good for developing web applications also. So if someone knows Spring, he need not have to know servlets or any other web frameworks. And there are multiple options in Spring to develop web applications. So we have Spring MVC and Spring Web Flux. These are the two options for building web application. Spring MVC is based on MVC pattern, and Spring Web Flux is based on reactive programming. It's more event driven or non-blocking asynchronous UI. So basically Spring Flux is a replacement for Spring MVC. So yes, I will be using IntelliJ IDE. So here in IntelliJ, we have support for Spring. So the way I am building Spring application, I have the latest version of IntelliJ IDE, and this is IntelliJ Professional Edition. So you see here Ultimate Edition, because you can get the trial version, which is available for 30 days, and then this can be used for learning and evaluation purpose. So now to build Spring application, you can always create a new project, and in this there is a tight integration with Spring Initializer. So basically the way to create a new Spring application is always you can create without IDE also any Spring application and import it later to the IDE. Say for example, here there is a website called start.spring.io. This site is called Spring Initializer. In this you can choose your project environment. Say for example, we'll be using Maven. You can use Gradle as well, which is based on Groovy. Now there's a new option available, which is you can write a Gradle script with Kotlin. So that combination is also supported. But yes, this is the classic option, which is Maven. We can choose various languages. Spring applications can be developed using Java or Kotlin or Groovy. Groovy is the Java version of Ruby. You can say Groovy is inspired from Ruby or Ruby on Rails. And yes, this is easier for Ruby developers to migrate to Spring. So Groovy is a good option. And Kotlin is another enhanced version of we can say Java, which is nowadays a standard for developing Android application. But yes, here we will be using Java. All these languages are JVM based languages. So Spring is mostly the Java based framework, and we'll be using 3.1.1 version, which is the latest stable release. Snapshot releases are the releases which is under development. So first thing what we can do is we can put here the project metadata, which could be com example or whatever you want to name it. We don't change it, and then we can package the application as a jar. This is the most popular option. This also includes embedded Tomcat server, so you don't have to install any web application server when you are developing Spring based applications. And as I said, here you have support for Java 20, Java 17, Java 11 and Java 8. So we can choose Java 20. Now to add various features, you can choose here dependencies and add all the features which you want. So let's do this using the ID. Same feature is available in the IntelliJ ID. So we don't need to go to the project, because here if we have to create a new project, say for example if we are working in a RESTful application using Spring MVC, I can choose this and it uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container. So you can choose it, so it gets added here. And once the dependencies are added, we can generate the project and we can download it. So when I say generate, it will generate, and if I click on explore, it shows what all it is generating. So we can view the files which are available. So this is the Maven file which it will be creating. It is including the Spring Web framework. So next step would be to download it after we see the generated files. This is the default project structure. You have a Spring application here, and Spring works like a standalone application. So you have a static void main, and then this Spring application is this Spring application running. And other important points are the file application.property. This is currently empty. This contains the configuration for Spring project. And then test cases are also generated, so associated tests can be put in this test package. Resources, if you have some UI, for example static HTML and images, these could be placed in this page, this folder, resources folder, and your Java code will come under SRC folder. And pom.xml is the project file which is used for building the project. And then we have Maven command line wrapper. MVNW stands for Maven wrapper. So when you create a project, you also don't need to install Maven. This will be embedded into your project. So this is about the project. It also will generate a git ignore file, so that if you are committing it to git based SVN, the various files which are related to the ID or which are related to building of binaries, they will be ignored, and what you will get is you will be only able to commit the source code, remaining files will be ignored. So let's not use the Spring initializer, we'll use the IDE. In IDE we can choose the same option. We choose a Spring initializer. This is this URL. Yes, I see someone is entering. Yes, yeah, great. So Makesh, yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, hi, sir.
Hi. So yes, no, we were discussing about Spring. We were moving further from our previous discussion. So this is a part 2 of our part 2 of our session, building Spring Boot applications. Building microservices based application using Spring Boot. So were you there in the part 1? We had it around 2 months back.
Yeah, I was there.
Okay, great. So yes, we will be building. Then this is great. So we'll be building an application, and I'll be covering also something around some design considerations, because when we design any application, it's also important to do very good thorough design using object oriented principles. So when we model objects and classes, and when you model very big applications, we use an approach called domain driven design. So we will be using domain driven design to build our applications. So yes, I also discussed various features of Spring. This is in continuation from the last session. So we will be using domain driven design. We will be using test driven development. This could be an approach. It's an add-on to agile approach. Test driven development is an agile development where you develop the test cases first, and then you write the code which passes the test cases. So this way you always have good test coverage. Then in addition to this, yes, we will be using so test driven approach. It ensures unit testing. There is another approach which is behavior driven development. Right, so we'll be using behavior. I'll also be briefing you about behavior driven development. I'll switch this. So this is an approach where you write the acceptance test, and you write high level tests which are acceptance test, and your code satisfies the acceptance test. So basically behavioral development is a kind of test driven development, but yes, here you emphasize more on writing the acceptance test for the application. So the frameworks which we'll be using is, we'll be using JUnit for writing unit tests, and we will be using Mockito for mocking the objects, and we will be using logging, as I already mentioned. For logging we will be using SLF for J framework. So this is there are various logging framework, say Logback, and there are few more, for example Log4j, and yes, so Log4j. Nowadays we have Log4j too. Basically SLFJ is an abstraction over all the logging frameworks. So yes, it's very easy to switch. If you use SLF4j, you can switch easily to any other framework. And what all application we will be developing, we will be deploying it in the cloud, and we will be following the concept of cloud driven development. Cloud native application development, I will better say this, cloud native application development. Cloud native is another term that means we will be containerizing our application, and we'll be using Kubernetes and Docker containers to package the application and then finally deploy it over any cloud environment like AWS. So this is overall about what are we covering. And yes, we will also be using another framework which is called Lombok framework. This is for writing boilerplate code in Java. So let's start. We will start creating some online application. So let's assume we have an online application, which is probably, let's say we are developing a web application, which is for building uh, a mathematical puzzle, right? So let's talk about an application which is a multi-user application. So here what I'll do is I'll create quickly the diagram which will describe what our application is all about. So I'm inserting a drawing here, and then we'll discuss about the application which we are trying to develop. So what we have is, assume we have a user here, this is the user, and we have an application. So we will be building an application. Application is a web-based application. So you have a web client here. Web client is definitely talking to a web service or a microservice. So we'll have multiple microservices here. So let me draw here some microservices. And microservices will utilize various features. So the microservices will be using a message queue, and they will be communicating with each other using message queues. So here, this is one mechanism of communication. Also, we will have a database. So there we will have a database here, and in this database, again, now the microservices will be writing to the database. So let me put another box here so that we can I can show that yes, these are, let me draw the outer one in lighter shade so that's easily visible, and inner ones in a darker shade. Yes. So here, let's say we have a microservice 1, we have here microservice 2, and we have a message queue. Basically, we will be using some topics, and the microservices will be publishing information to the topics, and they will be consuming. There will be a producer and consumer microservices which will be working on the some data which they will be communicating with each other, and at the same time they will be storing the data in the database. And as part of microservices, we may have separate applications, separate microservices having their own databases. So basically, in this case, it makes more sense because this is a monolith architecture. But when we will be splitting it, yeah, let me just save this. So what I have just drawn is a monolith architecture, because we have everything packaged in one single monolith. We have microservices, but we have this is basically services, web services, and they are tightly coupled. But yes, you have a loose coupling because we have communication using message queue. But yes, there is a database, there is a common database. So this is a monolithic architecture. So let me draw a corresponding microservices architecture so that becomes clear. So I'm just trying to copy it, and we'll refactor this application into a microservice based architecture. Yes. And now this I will update to make it microservices based architecture. So basically what we will be doing is we will be breaking these into independent services, and rather than having a single unit, we have application and we have a database as well, right? And then you have another another microservice here. This microservice will have a separate database. And we can have a different kind of database here. So let's say we will use here some NoSQL database, and in one service we may use SQL databases. So this is now our microservice based architecture. So basically we'll start with developing a monolith first. This is the first stage, and we'll be breaking it into microservice. And then we'll discuss what is the advantage and what is the approach we should take. Right. So as I said, we will need a IDE. IDE is IntelliJ IDE. You may use Visual Studio Code also. So both the IDEs are suitable. So let's start building the application. So yes, as I said, we will choose Java as the language here. We'll choose Maven. So the type of the project is a Maven project. We will choose some name of the application. So let's say this is an application for us, which is we are developing a backend for our application or a service, which is say a game or a puzzle, right? So I'll just put this name, and we are creating an online puzzle where we will be asking some questions to our users, and they will be answering these questions, right? So let's say our group is our website. This is the reverse. This is just for identifying the project. The artifact is called the puzzle service, but yeah, I'll just use puzzle, and this is the package. And we will be using latest version, so we may use 20 or 17. We are using mostly the same features, not too much difference will be there. You may choose any JDK. So yes, I can choose here, and let's see if I have the option to choose another JDK. Yeah, I have OpenJDK 20 also installed. So in IntelliJ you can install JDK very easily. Just you have to click add JDK, and then you can choose add JDK. Then it will give you option to choose the JDKs which are there in your system. So in this case, it detected that in my system I have the following JDK. JDK 20 is there. I have Adopt Open JDK 11. I have GraalVM JDK 17 and JDK 17. So various JDKs I had, but yes, I'll choose JDK 20. Then next step is I'll be using jar as a package. If you want to deploy this to any existing application server, you may choose var, but when you choose jar, then you get an embedded Tomcat server. Now I do next. When I do next, I see options of all the libraries which can be added to the Spring framework. So few of the libraries I will be adding. we are developing web application. So this is a web application, so we'll choose web, and then we will choose a Spring Web, because this provides, see here you will see the description also, that this framework is building web applications using RESTful services, and it is based on model view controller architecture, right? And it uses Apache Tomcat as a default embedded container. So this is what we will need. In addition to do this, I said we'll be requiring Lombok. So Lombok, I will search here, and there is a developer tool. This is just to simplify your development. So this is Java annotation library, which helps to reduce boilerplate code. So this is what we will be using, and we are writing some validations. We will be also using a database. Okay, so let me add the database also to our diagram. So just give me a minute. I'll open the notes again, because yes, as I said, we will be using a SQL database, right? So first we'll be developing a monolith, and then we will be breaking up the monolith into microservices. Since we have only 2 services, it is easier. So I will be able to demonstrate the benefit and also the process of breaking up the monolith. But yes, here we will use a database which is called H2 database. This is also a SQL or relational databases. It's a relational database. Now, yes, definitely when you create a database, when you create an application, you will need to connect to the database. So there are various approaches to connect to the database. We can connect to database, again I'm updating here. There are several approaches. One approach is use JDBC to connect to the database. Here you have low level control. You can write the SQL statement, you can prepare a statement, so you basically take care. There are libraries available in JDBC which is for connecting to the database using a database driver, and then you can prepare statements and execute the SQL statements. So this is all libraries provided in a framework which is called JDBC. We'll not be using JDBC, we will be using something called ORM, which is Object Relational Mapper, and in our case this is Hibernate based ORM which we'll be using. So Object Relational Mapper allows you to work with objects and classes, and in the background it takes care of preparing the SQL commands. It also takes care of caching also, and it is a very effective way of connecting to the database. So we'll use that. So now coming back, because I'm adding the data libraries, so that's why it's important to discuss the entire architecture first before I proceed further. So now to do this, I'll be using here bean validation, which is for validating the data, and this is based on Hibernate, right? So now this is all the packages which I have included. So we have web included, we have in developer tool Lombok included, and then we had validation, bean validation, which is part of SQL, and SQL we chose validation. So validation is in, I believe it is not appearing in the list. Yeah, this is their added dependencies. So let me try searching so that we know where it is in input and output. Okay, So this is slightly tricky. So yeah, we have web, we have developer tool, and then in input and output validation. So when I click create, it will create the project. And these are the versions available, which is exactly the same. So this is the same interface. So in web interface, I would have to go to Spring Initializer web application, download the project from the web application, and then import into IDE. But everything I can do right from my IDE itself. So let me start the IDE and open the project. So you see here I have the project running, right? So yeah, just verifying I had other projects open also in Spring. So they should not be running, because when I will be running this, it will be running in port 8080. Okay, so this is some tip about the browser, etc. I can close it. Basically you get a make file, MD file also, which is a readme file for the project. It gives lot of URLs for documentation for libraries which I included. So it is giving me documentation for REST service, for building a Spring MVC. So it is giving me relevant documentation also, but yeah, I can ignore it. This is just for help. But yes, what I have is a Maven project file here. So now I am free to update it. If I want to include some more library, I need not have to regenerate the project. I can just add the relevant dependencies. I can even update my Java version also from the POM file, because yeah, here is the Java version specified. So now I am having this project which I can use for adding more functionality to the code. But yes, before I go further, let me discuss some of the internal details of the Spring framework. So this is my Spring project. I got already Maven build for this. Maven uses POM file, which is this one. It's a XML file, and in this Maven project, yeah, I first need to update my Maven project. So when I'm updating my Maven, it is downloading the dependencies, right? Okay. So let me close this one so that my system is not running out of memory. I need to, yeah. So now I see there is some warnings. Let me analyze it. Right, so it's saying some plugins are not found. It's just a matter of running the Maven install command. So yes, I can do various Maven build steps. So one is clean. Yeah, I have not built the project, so I will generally, yeah, the flow is you install it. This is our various Maven plugins. So let me do Maven. So either you can double click on these files to run and install it, or I can do it from the command line terminal here, so which is provided with the ID. So here if I have to run it, yeah, let the terminal come. Yes, now the terminal has appeared. So what I can do is I can just print the working directory. So to see where I am inside the project folder automatically. So I have access to the MVNW. This is Maven wrapper. And in this, I would say Spring Boot and I will say run. Right. So this will run my current project. But yes, before running,